The preliminary report on the Air India 171 accident has been released by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. A preliminary report contains initial findings and it must be released within 30 days of the accident. Its purpose is to highlight any urgent actions needed to prevent any further incidents. As the investigation progresses and more details emerge, the findings in the preliminary report may change. In this video, I'll walk you through the notable findings from the report. On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171 from Ahmedabad to London crashed shortly after takeoff. It crashed into a medical college hostel building 1.5 kilometers from the airport. 260 people died in this tragic accident. The aircraft involved was a Boeing 787. The aircraft had received Airworthiness Review Certificate on 22nd May 2025 from DGCA just a few weeks before the accident. The purpose of an ARC is to ensure that an aircraft is safe to operate and meets the required standards. According to the report, all critical maintenance checks for the aircraft were completed as per the schedule. The captain had over 1500 hours of flying experience and the first officer had more than 3400 hours. On this flight, the first officer was the pilot flying and the captain was the pilot monitoring. The roles of pilot flying and pilot monitoring typically alternate between the captain and the first officer on each flight. The 787 has two black boxes, one located at the front and the other at the rear. These record cockpit voice and aircraft parameters such as speed, altitude, cockpit actions, etc. They're capable of recording more than 1500 parameters of the aircraft. The rear black box was recovered on June 13th, heavily damaged. The forward unit was recovered on June 16th and was in good condition. Specialized equipment was required to read the data from the black box, which was unavailable in India. It was sourced from the NTSB USA and it arrived on 23rd June. The complete data was downloaded on 24th June. Investigators analyze and correlate data from the voice and flight data recorders to reconstruct the sequence of events. Before we move to the details of the crash, we must understand certain terminologies. Fuel cutoff switches are cockpit controls that start or stop the fuel to the engines. When set to run, the fuel flows to the engine, and when set to cut off, the fuel supply stops and the engine shuts down. These switches are typically used to start and stop the engines on the ground before takeoff and after landing, or during in-flight emergencies such as engine fire or malfunction. A thrust lever is a cockpit control used to increase or decrease engine power during all phases of flight. The ram air turbine or RAT is a small emergency turbine that deploys underneath the aircraft to generate emergency electrical and hydraulic power in an event of a dual engine failure. According to the report, the aircraft began its takeoff at 1:37 p.m. IST. It reached the takeoff speed of 155 knots in 58 seconds and reached a maximum speed of 180 knots 7 seconds later. The aircraft appeared to be operating normally until that point, but immediately thereafter, the fuel cutoff switches for both the engines transitioned from run to cutoff within 1 second of each other. This shut down both engines. The investigation is yet to conclude what caused this transition. The report mentions that in the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, "Why did he cut off?" The other pilot responded that he did not do so. This statement has raised many questions due to the lack of context surrounding the conversation and remains open to multiple interpretations. Only the full cockpit voice recorder transcript can provide clarity. As both engines shut down, the ram air turbine or RAT deployed automatically to supply some electrical and hydraulic power. 10 seconds after the switches transitioned to cutoff, they returned to run again. Both the engines began to restart, but the aircraft did not have enough altitude to recover. At 1:39 p.m., a mayday was declared by one of the pilots, a signal used only in serious emergencies. Moments later, the aircraft crashed. Could the fuel switches have moved without human action? The report cites an FAA advisory that highlights issues with the fuel switches on some 737 aircraft. The switches on these aircraft were installed with the locking feature disengaged, which could potentially lead to accidental movement of the switches in flight. Although the switches on 787s are different, their design is similar. The FAA had recommended airlines to inspect them on 737, 787, and other aircraft. Since this information bulletin was not mandatory, Air India did not perform these checks on its 787s. Now, when were the fuel switches last replaced on the aircraft? According to the report, the throttle control module was replaced in 2019 and 2023. The replacement of this module also replaces the switches as they are part of the same unit. No issues have been reported with the fuel switches since their replacement in 2023. Investigators have recovered the switches from the wreckage and will examine them, focusing on their locking mechanisms. They were found in the run position as expected, which is also confirmed from the data in the flight data recorder. Investigators will also explore other possibilities, including the possibility of a software or a hardware malfunction. All possibilities will be examined before coming to the final conclusion. At this stage of the investigation, there are no recommended actions to Boeing 787s, although the DGCA ordered the airlines to check the fuel switches on 737 and 787 aircraft operating in India. The final report may take up to a year. AAIB has stated it will release any further relevant findings as the investigation progresses. We'll continue to follow this story and share any new updates. That's all for now. See you in the next video.